like in the question of Egypt, and because of, again, the question of security and oil, like the question of Bahrain and the likes. But it is time for Washington to wake up to the sweeping changes, the transformation that is taking place in the Arab world, and to think more about the future rather than to think of the same mindset that brought it to this very deadlock today, being on the wrong side of history. So instead of sitting on the sideline trying to rewrite history, this is the time to come together with the people in the Arab world and really do the right thing.
Al Jazeera senior political analyst Marwan Bashara speaking to us from New York. Earlier, Al Jazeera also spoke to a Libyan tribal leader. He threatened to block oil exports if the regime does not, quote, stop oppression of protesters. Here's what Sheikh Faraj al-Zuway told Al Jazeera.
From the south to the north, east and west, all tribes are united. We're not pressuring any tribe or any person. We see that the priority is to put an end to the bloodshed. We ask this of Muammar al-Gaddafi, Europe and the United States. Otherwise, we will be forced to stop oil production tomorrow.
So, Libyan state television, meanwhile, has been airing pictures of pro-Gaddafi protests. A caption on the screen now says the pictures were filmed a short while ago in the city of Sabah in central Libya. Dozens are seen singing, chanting and carrying Libyan flags, and photos of the long-time Libyan leader. We've also had eyewitness accounts suggesting that pro-Gaddafi supporters are now in Green Square in Tripoli. From France to the UK, European leaders are condemning the violence in Libya. In recent years, European countries have been cultivating their relationship with the Libyan leader, though, for business reasons, as Harry Smith explains.
Ever since Colonel Gaddafi was brought out of the diplomatic wilderness, Libya has become an increasingly important partner for Europe. On his first ever visit to Brussels in 2004, he was given the sort of ceremonial welcome which would have been unthinkable a few years before. Many of the European Union's 27 members are now big investors in Libya. You don't have to look far to see why Libya is an important trading partner for the European Union. It provides nearly 10% of its oil. It's now the third largest supplier behind Norway and Russia, and its importance is growing. Only recently it overtook Saudi Arabia for that third spot. And if Libya is important to Europe, then Europe is crucial to Libya. Italy buys 32% of Libya's oil output. Germany takes 14%, France 10%, the rest of Europe 23%. That means Europe takes a total of 79% of Libya's oil, by far its biggest customer. It was the decision of the United Nations to lift sanctions against Gaddafi's government that started the European rush. The former colonial power Italy was among the first to normalise relations. Others soon followed, attracted by the prospect of oil from a supplier close to Europe. Libya has the largest reserves of oil in Africa, and its deposits are relatively cheap to exploit. The release by Britain of the Lockerbie bomber was a sign of the UK's willingness to foster good relations with Gaddafi, even though it risked damaging ties with the United States. But even Britain is now condemning Libyan actions.
We condemn the use of heavy weaponry against protesters. We're shocked by the reports of the number of deaths, 35 apparently at one hospital overnight. And we've had to say very clearly, just because the news media doesn't have full access to Libya, the eyes of the world are still upon the Libyan government and how it is responding to protest.
And as the crisis deepens, Europe is coming under increasing pressure to act. Harry Smith, Al Jazeera.
Professor Zartman of Johns Hopkins University is still with me here in the studio. He's an expert on Libya. Also joining us is Michael Singh. He's formerly of the National Security Council. He's in Washington too. Professor, then, what about this issue of Western support? Wouldn't, I mean, we heard some impassioned calls just there for the West to intervene, at least in some manner. Actually, our guest from Libya seemed to be asking for even more drastic action. But revolution that may be happening in North Africa?
Yeah, I'm a little saddened about the contradiction in this. We were told that the United States is always mucking around in this area and should keep its hands off of it, but please do come and help us.
Well, I mean, that was actually perhaps less likely in a place like Egypt and Bahrain, where obviously they do far more than help. I mean, they're actively propping up client states. But is there a similar relationship?
States, particularly since Libya gave up its nuclear arms, has tried hard to have a good relationship with Libya and the government that it has. Rather uneven in his cooperation and working together. So I don't think the United States has a chummy relationship with Libya. The United States is now, after the intifadas that have been taking place in Tunisia and in Egypt, it has been very much engaged and interested in helping the movement, the popular movement. Remember that a country like the United States is torn between two poles, one on its values, which are democracy and participation and human rights and things like that, and the other on its position as an international leader trying.
But do values have a place in foreign policy? We haven't seen much.
Gaddafi?
No, values in American foreign policy. I mean, of course, yes, they're caught between two poles, but we usually see only one in the ascendant in foreign policy, don't we?
Well, there's been a good deal. In fact, curiously, as you remember, the Obama administration has been criticized for not backing and not touting as much the democracy goals that the Bush administration, of all people, was supporting rather loudly. And in regard to Egypt, Condi Rice was very critical of Mubarak.
We're getting some pictures which we're just receiving from Libyan state television, where the Libyan state television is claiming this is happening right now in Tripoli, and these are pro-Gaddafi supporters, clearly, because they're being pictured on Libyan state television. But these are live pictures right now, which we're hearing, according to state television, that they're live. But certainly, though, it does chime with eyewitness accounts that we've had that pro-Gaddafi supporters are now taking areas of parts of Tripoli. Michael Singh remains with us in Washington, and as we see these pictures, I suppose, is this why the US continues to hedge its bets then? They just simply don't know, and in the end, there's no point backing the losing side, no matter the polarity towards morality that may exist.
No, I wouldn't put it that way, certainly. I mean, when you look at these images of pro-government protesters, this is pretty standard, frankly, in this type of situation. We don't know who these people are. They could be paid. They could be brought in from the countryside. I think what motivates the U.S. position is, first, you've heard the administration condemn the violence. You've heard the administration, I think, be tougher on the Gaddafi government than they were on, say, the Egyptian government. But the U.S. doesn't want to blunder about. I think the first thing the U.S. will be doing is meeting behind closed doors to decide what is the policy. I mean, remember, the policy is not made by the spokesman, ideally. So they'll need to decide what is the policy and what can we do effectively to intervene on behalf of the protesters. And then once that policy is set, then they'll be in a stronger position to, I think, hopefully come out and say it.
And arguably, perhaps they don't have that much leverage in Libya. They do in Bahrain and Yemen and elsewhere. So does that mean that they have made that decision that, frankly, it's better to stay on the side of those doing the repressing rather than those fighting the repression?
No, I don't think so. And I think that, the type of leverage we have in a place like Bahrain, hopefully, is positive leverage. We have a good relationship, and we can call upon the Bahrainis to exercise restraint, and I think we saw that happen in the Pearl Roundabout after that tragic, terrible violence.
It hasn't made much of a difference there, and they do have a more significant presence there than they do in Libya, for example.
Well, and in Libya, I think, you have to remember all that trade that we talked about that comes from Libya.